Since Donald Horne described Australia as the lucky country in 1964, his tagline, "Run by second-rate people who share its luck," has generally been ignored, and most Australians taking on the more positive idea of this country being gifted beyond others. The Griffins, attracted by the nascent democracy of a brave land with leading social agendas, came with high ideals and hopes. They found, as with most things in life, reality is more complex than that. First, some explanation of the title, The Magic of Australia. As Anna Rubbo said, Marion Mahony Griffin's unpublished magnum opus, The Magic of America, provides a key to understanding the Griffins' intellectual and creative contribution to architecture. I'd like to look at the issues they were concerned with in this that resonate with me, and consider how the magic of Australia, or our lucky country, has impacted those issues and ideals over the last 100 years. I'd also like to consider how we might move forward in the future in a way that would align and build on the inspirational legacy of Marion Mahony and Walter Burley Griffin. Anna Rubbo also notes, Marion Griffin lived a feminist principle well ahead of her time in the way she was able to integrate the various aspects of her life into a whole. Work, or the public, merged with the private, which in turn merged with the political dimensions of their lives. I'm going to take Marion's lead tonight and wander around selected ideas as they are structured in The Magic of America, moving freely through personal, professional and political terrains. I will speak my mind and place emphasis on issues I find interesting, tinted with my personal political ideals and the New South Wales bias of my life experience. Using Marion's structure of The Magic of America, I'll look at the following areas. I'm not going to talk about the imperial battle, but I will talk about the federal battle with democracy and social justice and design competitions, the municipal battle, local government and planning, the personal battle, particularly women in architecture and Marion, and then the future. So I beg your indulgence in this personal tour of mine. The first people of this nation believed there was much more to this place than the actual physical land. Their dreaming involves a complex network of knowledge, faith and practices that derive from stories of creation, which dominates all spiritual and physical aspects of Aboriginal life. The dreaming sets out the structures of society, the rules for social behaviour and the ceremonies performed in order to maintain the life of the land. In essence, the dreaming comes from the land. In Aboriginal society, people did not own the land, it was part of them, and it was part of their duty to respect and look after Mother Earth. It governed the way people lived and how they should behave. Max Dalamanman said in My People's Dreaming, "We saw the connectedness between the sea and the land. We had our own calendars in nature to let us know the migration of what was in the sea. We could read Grandmother Moon and know when the shellfish and other creatures were moving into the shallows to replenish what we had taken from our gathering area. From up in the country, there were sources of information such as the colour of the bark on the trees and the colour of the leaves at certain time of the season that would tell us to venture down the mountains and into the grassland. Nature has a beautiful way of guiding us and showing us and explaining to us what was becoming available. We were reading the sacred text of the land. We travelled slow so we could read the sacred text. For over 60,000 years, they learnt how to live and work in and with this unique environment. They sang, danced, made art and told stories so that knowledge could be handed on from generation to generation. Their ability to live respectfully in their land grew from these practices and storytelling. Tim Flannery, in his book, The Future Eaters, made the powerful observation that living in this land is not a passive pastime. Here, a more gentle force, that is co-adaptation, is important. This is because harsh conditions force individuals to cooperate. Even the Europeans, with their code of mateship, are perhaps being shaped by the same forces. A nascent utopian democracy and the opportunity to make a significant impact on the development of the country's built environment were the lure for the Griffins. The amazing landscape, some understanding of the philosophy of the first Australians, and many interesting Australians they met came as welcome surprises. The difficulty of the bureaucracy in Canberra and pedantic service providers in Castle Crag were less attractive aspects of the deal, and the dramatic impacts of the deadly First World War and financial crisis of the Depression were not helpful. The difficulty of making their personal relationship was worked out amongst these competing issues, with the embrace of their new friends rather than their extended family. So 100 years later, where are we at now? How have we progressed in that time? Under the heading of the Federal Battle, the first of Marion's inspired sections, I'd like to quote from Anne Watson. Both Walter and Marion believed in the power of the American democratic tradition with its enshrinement of individual liberty as an agent for good, not just at home, but in the wider world. Marion thought that parliamentary democracy as practised in European countries, and particularly by governments of the Westminster lineage, to be far inferior to the American congressional system. As an inheritance from Thomas Jefferson, it was the duty of all good Americans to spread the word. Walter wrote, "Australia, of most democratic tendencies and bold radical government, may well be expected to look upon her great future, and with it her federal capital, with characteristic big vision." So what did democracy actually look like in 1913? The Commonwealth of Australia was formed on 1st of January 1901 through the federation of the 6 states under a single constitution. The non-Indigenous population at the time of the federation was 3.8 million. Australia's first Prime Minister was Edmund Barton, who led the movement for federation in New South Wales. The nation's first parliament was opened at Exhibition Building in Melbourne on 9th of May 1901. The founders of the new nation wanted Australia to be harmonious, cohesive and egalitarian. They had progressive ideas about human rights, the observance of democratic procedures and the value of a secret ballot. Australia was one of the first countries to give women the right to vote and the right to sit in Parliament. South Australia extended these rights to women in 1985. All Australian women won the right to vote and the right to sit in the Commonwealth Parliament in 1902. However, Australians in 1913 lived with contradictions. Proud of their prosperous progressive democracy and self-consciously British, many also expected to face an Asian invasion. Japan's recent victories over China and Russia made many Australians fearful. Determined to protect a white Australia, the government created a large citizen army and a modern navy. To capture where I think we are now with regards to democracy and social justice, I would like to read from the Victorian Women's Trust recent manifesto, A Switch in Time, Restoring Respect to Australian Politics. I'm sure if Marion was here in Australia at the moment, she'd be an active part of this organisation, which places great value on the honouring of gender equality, democracy and care for the earth. I'll quote, "Over the past 2 years, we've watched with growing concern as 3 interrelated negative forces have been unleashed, in large part triggered by people intent on tearing down a legitimate minority government, which also happens to be led by the first woman to occupy the country's powerful top job. In the first instance, important democratic principles are being disregarded by those who are opposed to the current minority government. Second, respect for women has also been pushed aside by gendered attacks directed at the Prime Minister since her election to office, suggesting we are not yet ready to give women and girls the recognition that is implied in a fair go in public life. Third, rather than respecting the weight of scientific evidence that warns the planet is in peril, A range of sectional interests, parts of the media, and a politically expedient campaign against carbon pricing have sought to discredit this body of authoritative science. In diminishing public confidence in the science, these elements have elevated their own narrow interests at the expense of the common good. Further into the document, there is commentary on democracy in this nation. A stable, robust, healthy democracy, such as the one we have created in Australia, does not of itself possess magical safeguards or protections. These lie with every one of us. As citizens, it is up to us to nourish and sustain our democracy, and to this end, we empower our elected representatives to maintain and extend what we see as necessary democratic standards. It is also up to us to be on the alert for the emergence of system faults that require attention and threats that could result in the erosion and weakening of our democratic institutions and political culture. We need to be prepared to stand up and take action when we sense that a situation is developing which, unchecked, will lead to serious strains within our democracy. Nationally, we are at such a point now. As we witness increasingly less compassionate ideas being developed about how we should deal with our international obligations to assist the many refugees fleeing appalling situations in their home countries, it seems that we have moved away from the optimistic ideals of our nation's founders 100 years ago, the very ideals that attracted Walter and Marion to our shores. However, as in 1913, there are many contradictions. I think there have been some positive and wide-ranging achievements in recent times. As independent Rob Oakeshott noted in his valedictory speech, in the last Parliament there have been 585 bills negotiated through this place, 300 private members' motions and bills, and an awful lot of committee work, 87% of which were bipartisan and 13% are in dispute. From my point of view, ultimately, as a loyalist to the Parliament and a loyalist to the office of Prime Minister, I leave optimistic and confident that parliamentary democracy and the Parliament itself is stronger than all of it. Not quite the hopeless failure it has been accused of by some. Some of the bills that I think have been particularly interesting and I'm sort of proud that we have negotiated as a country include the Disability Care Australia. This compassionate financial support package recognises the importance of providing support and care for the people of our community with permanent and significant disability, so they, their families and carers can better participate and enjoy their lives. It rightly enjoys bipartisan support in the federal government. Plain packaging of tobacco products. I think this is a great leading initiative to seriously tackle smoking and its harmful effects, and has been carefully watched around the world by regulators keen to implement a similar one, and tobacco companies terrified their business model is in danger. Other progressive ideas struggling to stay on track or whose difficult passage resulted in compromised outcomes include the Gonski report. While it may be universally agreed that education is not only a right for all citizens and is critical for Australia to take its place in the future, the way in which different schools, public, private and religious, should be funded is far more complex. I hope the politics of today can get out of the way so the good advice of Mr Gonski can be properly implemented. The carbon price. This market mechanism for pricing what is damaging and providing an incentive for positive behaviour change has been in place for just over a year, along with its support mechanisms. I see that the outcomes of that, which is reduced energy consumption and much more renewables in place, signals that this has been a success. Last night I was at the launch of the Beyond Zero Emissions building plan in Sydney, revealing some really great work in line with all of this. So I am concerned that the early change to either a carbon trading scheme or possible removal altogether would change us from being leaders in the world in this area to laggards. Tasmanian Forest Agreement. After decades of serious conflict, this deal has been negotiated between environmental groups, timber industry, workers' unions and timber community representatives. In return for the protection of high conservation value forests, the federal government will support a new future for the state's wood products industries. The details are complex and support and success is not guaranteed. However, as an environmentalist born into a timber milling family who sees the use of sustainably harvested timber as integral to ecological design, I have a great vested interest in seeing that ideas like this and solutions to these issues have to be found. The Murray-Darling Basin Plan, another intractable problem that started actually 100 years ago in the Griffins' time, where competing state interests for access to water has nearly killed the source that delivers it. The Murray-Darling Plan was signed into law with hardly any acclaim at the end of 2012, with the aim of returning 3,200 billion litres to the river system. Not enough for the environmentalists and too much for the farmers. We'll have to see who's right. The NBN. The arrival of the 21st century's superhighway has the potential to remove the tyranny and cost of distance and location. Even 10 years ago, I don't think anyone had an understanding of how what the future would be with mobile phones and tablets and all sorts of things. So too, I believe that the potential of this is very exciting and unknown. And I'd prefer the system to be over-designed and able to accommodate the ingenuity of our best and brightest as they work out what could be done with this, rather than saying it's too big for, it's not going to be for just movies. While many of these progressive ideas could have been done better, I think it is remarkable that they have been done at all, and often with sign-off from long time and bitter opponents. As would be expected, those with vested interest in the current situation are spending a lot of time, energy and money trying to convince us these measures are wrong. As the buggy makers found 100 years ago and Kodak not so long ago, you need to anticipate the future, adapt and change, or die out. I see the fact these issues are being identified and acted on as signs of a democratic Australia, interested in social and environmental justice, and able to pursue a broad range of issues important for the wider society. I think the Griffins would have agreed and probably been actively involved in that. What is going to happen at the next stage of our country's development will be up to the people who exercise their democratic rights at the ballot box on the 7th of September, and in the months after, keeping whichever government is elected honest. We'll have to see if our magic will provide the leadership required to keep us at the forefront of progressive governments. One can't leave the federal battle section without referring to design competitions. Arguably, the best thing that can be said about the design competition for Canberra is that it brought the Griffins to Australia and provided the strong planning legacy that still has the potential to develop into one of the world's best cities. Now I believe design competitions are a mixed blessing. They are good in that they provide the opportunity for people with, from a range of people who might not get the opportunity to be considered. The downside is they usually ask for this intellectual property to be given at no cost, and generally there's no guarantee as to what will be done with the ideas. Sheridan Burke noted last year in her Marion Mahony Griffin talk, the spirit of optimism and national confidence that possessed the Australian people 111 years ago was well matched with the keen interest of the architectural and engineering professions in the opportunity to plan an ideal city. The Griffins had followed the Federation of Australian States with great interest, and Walter was enthusiastic about entering the international competition. He would aim to provide for its future citizens the daily experience of democracy at work and at play. While it seems Walter and the team took some time to start work on the actual design, one of the finest city plans of the 20th century emerged and was delineated by Marion. Persuasive, exquisite, seductive, and comprehensively informative, Marion's drawings are a timeless lesson in great storytelling. This story about what Australia's capital could be and how it could capture the idea of democracy was so compelling it beat the other 136 competition entries. This included second place winner Alfred Agache, who later master planned Rio de Janeiro, and third place winner Eliel Saarinen, successful Finnish architect and father of Eero Saarinen, influential judge for the Sydney Opera House competition. In 1912, in his 1912 New York Times interview, Walter noted, "I have planned a city not like any other city in the world. I have planned it not in a way that I expected any governmental authorities in the world would accept. I have planned an ideal city, a city that meets my ideal of the city of the future." His words proved to be terribly prescient. After the competition announcement and in Griffin's absence, the fourth place or Australian plan, developed by a group of Commonwealth public servants who were British aligned from the departmental board, I'm not sure that this is their scheme, but it's another one of the other schemes, was promoted to them by the public as the winning scheme. Dubbed a third-rate Luna Park by a renowned British planner, the newly elected Minister for Home Affairs, W.H. Willie Kelly, quickly realised it was far inferior to the scheme so beautifully portrayed by Marion and took steps to immediately address the problem. This worked for a while. Ultimately, the senior public servants, with a strong leaning to Britain and a distrust of Americans, supported by some very eminent Australian architects, created a situation that was intolerable for Walter, and he reluctantly resigned. Fortunately, Walter and Marion found much admiration and support in other parts of Australia and stayed on to contribute to our collective development. Their strong plan also managed to survive, such that the general public considered the plan of Canberra to be theirs, even if much of the detail is not. Have things improved since then? If we consider a couple of bigger competitions since then, one would have to say no. In fact, they've progressively got worse, particularly in Sydney. The Sydney Opera House competition took a similar path to Canberra's. A smart young architect from overseas with brilliant and inspiring ideas for a critical part of our land came here with great hopes. Utzon also found difficult bureaucrats and politicians who did not understand the design and development approach required by such an innovative building and was intolerant of the budget and time overruns. This time, the eventual resignation forced our skilled immigrant to reluctantly leave our country, denying Australia a great architectural mentor and contributor. At least the strong ideas that won the competition are still very much part of the building and continue to contribute to the beauty of Sydney in a very significant way. We live nearby and walk past there every morning, and I still love it every day. A relatively recent international competition in Sydney, Barangaroo, has shown this issue can get even more difficult and even less rewarding. It started as a request for ideas for the land and how it might be developed, changed into a different creature. The original design was won by a group of local architects with a deep understanding of the place and how to integrate it with the existing city. The jury's decision was unanimous. Not long after, however, the Sydney Harbour Foreshore Authority, then the Barangaroo Development Authority, the BDA, sidelined the architects as they developed the scheme and eventually excluded them and their ideas. Coupled with the responsibility of delivering all the infrastructure, public spaces and buildings for a fixed price, and the ability to lodge both complying and non-complying tenders or options, the subsequent tenders for the various stages of the development of the site moved even further away from the winning design. The congruence of the current scheme with a second place winner of the competition submitted by Lend-Lease and Rogers, Stirk, Harbours and Partners shows how true it is that winning isn't everything. And then, just when we thought it couldn't get any worse, it does. Along comes James Packer with an unsolicited development proposal for a casino, initially in the middle of the planned open space. A socially and environmentally reprehensible idea, that does not comply with any planning guidelines or offer any real benefit for the site, city or country? I don't think. However, it looks like money continues to talk in Sydney, and it's most likely to receive approval from the New South Wales Government in the near future. On the other side of the inlet, Darling Harbour Convention Centre takes a different turn. Short-circuiting the time delays of an open design competition that would inevitably be overturned if any architects bothered to enter, the government simply asked the two biggest developers in town who had the capacity to undertake the project what they should do with an area adjacent to the CBD twice the size of Barangaroo. No master planning by the government architect or others to evaluate optimal solutions, just a developer-led approach silenced by commercial in confidence contracts. Is there any hope? It will be interesting to see how the Flinders Street station design competition turns out. I hope the Melburnians are more capable of honouring that design, their design winners, than Sydney-siders. However, perhaps not all is lost in the Emerald City. After dealing with less than great submissions for major buildings in the latter part of last century, the City of Sydney initiated their design excellence policy. Large projects are required to demonstrate design excellence through a competitive process. Assisted by an advisory panel of experts, including James Werrick, the City is actively pursuing ways of improving the quality of both private development and the City's own urban design and public projects in ways that work for all stakeholders. Good results of this range with great buildings, such as No. 1 Bligh Street, the Renzo Piano Complex in Macquarie Street, Prince Alfred Park Pool, and the Community Centre in Waterloo. I think this is probably the most practical and excellent way of developing competition since the Canberra one, and possibly something the Griffins might have agreed with. So on to the municipal battle, local government and planning. The second section Marion titled The Municipal Battle, and as noted in Building for Nature, Walter Burley Griffin and Castle Crag, the planning scene in Sydney in the early part of the 20th century was somewhat different to today. In the 1910s, the desirability of coordinating new suburban development through town planning had been promoted by visiting British planners and by conferences in Adelaide, Melbourne and Brisbane. The new capital, Canberra, had created a lot of interest, and Griffin had given many lectures about it. The pages of the Australian-wide journal Building was full of articles about town planning and encouraged debate about the development of an Australian house style. In Sydney, the desirability of a healthy planned environment and the need for government to take action had been the focus of government inquiries. In 1909, the Royal Commission for the Improvement of Sydney and Suburbs included recommendations to give municipalities control over the layout of new building areas and full powers to regulate the height and style and character of buildings erected on the slopes or skyline of Sydney Harbour. The Commission also recommended that a town planning bill applying to the whole of the state and following a recent British model be enacted. So into this burgeoning planning scene came the Griffins, with their wonderful ideas of designing a model suburb called Castle Crag. Their approach was to design around the natural forms and landscape, with walkways between the houses connecting communal parks and facilities, including the entire foreshore and an amphitheatre for communal gatherings and plays. The houses were intended to be modest in size, constructed from locally found materials and Walter's ingenious knitlock concrete blocks, and sited so they worked with and formed part of the native landscape. Their suburb was not only a subdivision, but was a vision for creating an inclusive, creative community that was at one with and inspired by its environment. Walter's persuasive design and personality and Marion's glorious renderings were instrumental in turning their ideas into reality. As noted of Walter, speaking as a veteran of planning wars and of struggles with routine-bound officials and an indifferent public, he nonetheless defended radical thinking. In his view, the architect must be a creative visionary, but for his plan or building to be constructed, he must mobilise public opinion and the only way to do that is to appeal to the imagination. 100 years on, New South Wales is facing a radical overhaul to our planning system. What would Walter and Marion think about the proposed legislation? The New South Wales government suggests that their new plan will result in unprecedented consultation that will balance many views, more homes and jobs coming from planning responsibly for growth, clearer rules, better decisions and faster assessment within the rules, heritage protection, environmental protection. According to the Better Planning Network, a volunteer-based organisation formed at the end of August 2012 by community groups concerned about the New South Wales government planning reforms, reality may be somewhat different. To quote, "A close reading of the White Paper and planning bills reveals that under the new planning system, ordinary residents will not be able to comment on up to 80% of developments, including major developments such as blocks of residential flats or land subdivisions. Moreover, community consultation in strategic planning or development assessment will not be mandatory or enforceable. Residents will not be able to challenge strategic planning decisions through judicial review proceedings, and the Minister and Director General of Planning will have broad discretion powers to amend strategic planning controls at any point in time, with or without consulting the affected community." I also note that the protection of heritage is mentioned only once, and the environment a couple of times. It would appear that speedy development, unhampered by pesky community members or heritage and environmental concerns, is the aim of the game. Perhaps Walter and Marion may have welcomed this freedom from rules and bureaucracy that would enable their more radical and unusual ideas to be implemented. However, I think that the 100 years of experience since their time, they'd realise why controls are necessary. As the beautiful place they created is threatened by ever-increasing demands of residents that are out of sync with the original notions of what Castle Crag is about, and the significant majority of developers across the state aim to do only what is required for communal benefit, they would see that the freedoms they needed to do their work could be dangerously exploited today. And as we seem poised to lose the good planning gains of the last 20-30 years in New South Wales, I hope that the people of our state continue to try to keep the government accountable, and the government acts quickly to change the planning system again when the disastrous outcomes that are likely to occur do. Perhaps we should take advice from Walter. As David Heaton recalls, in 1924, Walter Burley Griffin went to Melbourne to deliver a lecture for the Henry George Society. His paper was titled "The Menace of Governments." The anger and distrust developed from his Canberra experience is palpable. He warns, "Make no mistake, the elimination of the pernicious power of the state to coerce and mould the people will come only through the ablest writers, storytellers, playwrights, scenario makers and picture designers." I hope that those people can help us in the future. And on to the personal battle. Women in architecture and Marion. When Marion graduated as the second female architect from MIT and then became the first registered female architect in the USA, she entered a profession where women faced a great deal of discrimination. When applying for her first job, her friend and colleague, the first female graduate of MIT, Sophia Hayden, used her initials only in the application form. Being successful in that way and arriving for her interview, it was revealed that she was indeed a woman and was treated so appallingly she eventually left the profession. Perhaps this should not be surprising, as they were trailblazers and many were unused to having women working in this field at the time. However, I think the confusion around Marion's contribution to the work of the Griffins has a lot to do with the problems surrounding the role of women in architecture at the time, and the concern that having one acknowledged as a senior partner in a practice was dangerous. As the sole owner of my own practice for more than 21 years, I realise how lucky I am not to face this prejudice. However, I am astounded to find that in 2013 there continues to be much discussion around this issue. which has not been resolved satisfactorily since Marion graced our shores. A website called Parler has been set up to take this issue forward. Its stated purpose is a site for active exchange and discussion. Parler brings together research, informed opinion and resources on women, equity and architecture in Australia. It seeks to expand the spaces and opportunity available to women while also revealing the many women who already contribute in diverse ways. Not wanting to take the role of victim or underestimate the achievements of many female architects, the site progressively engages with those who are working to help move the whole profession forward by addressing these complex issues in a creative and positive way. Naomi Steed, co-editor, writes, "Women have taken an active part in architectural practice in Australia for more than a century, but remain strikingly underrepresented at the highest levels of the profession today. Studies show that women are more likely to work part-time or juggle diverse types of marginal architectural work, more likely to work within government or academia, more likely to experience career interruption, more likely to leave the profession altogether, less likely to actively seek out promotion, and much less likely to occupy a senior role. But what if the particular challenges faced and overcome by many women architects could be a spur to innovation and change in the profession more broadly?" she asks. "What if women's career patterns in architecture, rather than being seen as aberrant or unconventional, instead encouraged us to rethink the definition of what is an architect, what are the characteristics of architectural success, and what other models of architectural practice might be possible?" In case you think this is only relevant in Australia, they're having similar conversations in the UK. Jeremy Till writes, "One of the problems is that architects like to think of themselves as a liberal profession, wrongly conflating creative innovation with social innovation. This means that issues such as gender are not often engaged in the belief that the overriding liberal ethos deals with them. This is very different from the more conservative professions, such as law and medicine, who have stared their own imbalances in the face, found them uncomfortable, and started addressing them, resulting in a much better gender balance than in architecture." In 2004, as president of the New South Wales chapter of the RAIA, as it was then, I decided to give my 2004 annual award to the practice doing most to encourage women to stay and progress in the profession. Amongst a number of excellent entries from practices of all sizes, the winner was the firm Hassel, which continues to support and celebrate their female employees in a range of interesting ways. However, as the general situation in the profession has not changed much since then, I'm not sure the idea behind this award had the desired effect. Perhaps we need a best practice design competition to explore alternative ideas about what a better architectural workplace might be for both women and men. It will need a brief which encourages participants to consider a diverse range of ideas for collaborating, working, managing different sized groups, co-locating or working apart, as well as engaging with the many new tools that could assist this. This might be a way of creatively working towards seriously addressing the issues we continue to identify as holding back our profession as a whole. I think Marion would probably agree and be part of this. And finally, on to Marion. There are so many aspects of Marion's life. I think she's such an amazing woman that I feel aligned with, and many that I feel totally inspired by. Her life was full and varied. Her enjoyment of the natural world, the arts, teaching, social aspects of community engagement, family and friends all contributed to who she was and how she lived her life. Architecture for her was a vehicle to creatively distill these interests and explore ways of living and being in this world. I too have been attracted to pursue active involvement in fields not directly connected to the practice of architecture. My involvement in teaching, particularly at the University of Newcastle, has been one of the most educative and transformational experiences of my life, and one that led me to see how enriching wider interests can be. My inclusion on the academic senate while there opened me to the wider university community and prepared me for other board involvements. And my connection with other academics interested in sustainability and the role of women in architecture at many universities was also formative. This led to my subsequent involvement in the New South Wales Architects Registration Board, New South Wales chapter of the Institute of Architects, the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, and the Australian Building Codes Board. A stint on Bicycle New South Wales Board, and my current board roles with Carriageworks, Greening Australia New South Wales, Sacred Heart Education Ministry reveal my extended interests in these different areas. The Living Futures Institute Australia brings together, I think, all these interests in a group that really considers and cares for the broader issues of sustainable living and the architecture that can support this. Marion's early childhood experiences in natural environments were clearly informative for her, as they created a love for and understanding of the importance of such places in her life. The bushlands and waterways she found in Australia were unsurprisingly appreciated and sought out for her personal interest and projects. I was born in Grafton on the banks of the mighty Clarence River, under the shade of North Coast eucalyptus forests that my father's family had logged. Moving at age 3 to Sydney, my parents decided that the then undervalued suburb of Mossman, with its beautiful beaches and bushland, would be a great place to raise their children. My strong connection with the water and landscape is not surprising, and I find both therapeutic and inspiring. I have read with interest of the strong and interesting female influences in Marion's life, particularly after the early loss of her father. Her nurturing and alternative ways of thinking and being were clearly influenced and developed by these people. While sadly losing my mother when I was 20, I feel blessed to be part of a large and loving family. The strongly masculine side of my father's family was well balanced by my 4 sisters, many lovely aunts, female cousins and friends. As with Marion, who loved children but pursued a career rather than motherhood, I decided in my 20s, after reading Simone de Beauvoir, that in this life I would see what I could achieve as a female architect, unencumbered by family responsibilities. My teenage years, full of family and babysitting for others, seemed to have satisfied my maternal instincts and enabled me to appreciate the benefits of such a direction. While not a popular or common decision, and one that was continually questioned until I passed the normal child-rearing age, it's one that I remain totally happy with. And I know that the wide-ranging interests that I've been able to pursue and groups I've been involved with, I wouldn't have been able to do if I'd taken a different path. Another great side benefit was that I didn't need to find their father and embed myself in an ongoing, stable relationship. And I have been privileged to enjoy the company and have some relationships with some really interesting people who have been very important in my personal and professional development. I think that we're all able to make such decisions, our own decisions in this regard, is a joy and a privilege of living in a place such as Australia at this stage of its history. I'm uneasy in talking about other people's relationships, particularly when I've not even met them. However, my reading suggests that Marion's life with Walter Burley Griffin was an exciting and rewarding one, initiated and sustained through their mutual interests and philosophies. Not without its difficulties, their overriding attraction and approach to life won through. 10 years ago, I was lucky to connect with John McInerney, who I married in November last year. An architect, urban designer, politician, attracted to the life and work of the Griffins, we enjoy many similar interests. Our different personalities ensure life is never dull, while our mutual concern for the world and love of each other motivate us to solve any conflicts that might arise. I think this is part of the universal truth that good relationships of any kind require a sound and compatible basis, followed by constant and tender attention. While today's commercial world argues for data-led, research-reliant management, Marion's interest in the anthroposophical movement reveals a very different approach. Being a source of spiritual knowledge and a practice of inner development, it relies heavily on one's own inherent wisdom or intuition. Her interest in anthroposophy developed over her time in Australia, particularly while she lived in Castle Crag. While not involved in this particular movement, I'm very aware of the importance of being able to listen to my own inner guidance. This has informed many of the key decisions that have shaped both my professional and personal life. As I noted at the outset, the traditional owners of this land are well acquainted with this way of living. This is their way. For anyone who takes time to stop, listen and learn, there is much to discover. And as Tim Flannery suggests, perhaps this land is more important than we think. Perhaps it's slowly shaping us, its inhabitants. And so to the future. The Griffins created through their planning and architecture a powerful and seductive narrative about what a democratic, community-minded and ecologically balanced country Australia should be. 100 years on, the storyline still has great validity. The details and colour of how this should be illustrated need to be developed further to accommodate the complexity and changes that have occurred in that time. In considering where we might find some inspiration to update and enrich their story, I'd like to share with you the ideas and work of some contemporary North Americans who I admire and who I think are very aligned with the Griffins and their ideals. Laurie Brown, architect and academic, believes that architecture can participate in and impact people's everyday lives. She says, design is not a passive act, it is a critical engagement with community, and you have to be cognizant of the power you have and how you use it. What we do is really important. We have a responsibility, and it's not just about making the next great form. There are many other things that go into architecture. We need more people to use their agency to make positive change. Every decision we make and don't make, I believe, has impact. Every action speaks to and promotes what we believe in. Whether it's buying fruit and vegetables from a local farmer to directly support them, or choosing ethically sourced materials for the buildings we design, we must take responsibility for our decisions. This is also very empowering as we take control of and use for the good the power that comes from making these decisions count. Paul Hawken, environmentalist, entrepreneur and author, echoes Marion's call to see fairies when he advocates we rediscover the childlike quality in ourselves. He asks us to allow this to make changes in what we do and be here and part of everything. He believes we need to find love as it is all-encompassing and generous, and this is how we should live. His book, Blessed Unrest, is an exploration of the diversity of the environmental and social justice movement and the impact it is having. Fundamentally, it's a description of humanity's collective genius and the unstoppable movement to reimagine our relationship to the environment and one another. He sees that the world will be saved by this community-driven movement and how our involvement with groups we care about is important and part of a much larger thing. Jason McLennan, architect and sustainability expert, is the founder and creator of the Living Building Challenge. This progressive and stringent green building program challenges us to ask the question, what if every single act of design and construction made the world a better place? What if every intervention resulted in greater biodiversity, increased soil health, additional outlets for beauty and personal expression, a deeper understanding of climate, culture and place, a realignment of our food and transportation systems, and a more profound sense of what it means to be a citizen of a planet where resources and opportunities are provided fairly and equitably. As chair of the Living Futures Institute Australia, I'm excited by this approach to design. It incorporates philosophy, advocacy and design in a truly holistic way. It calls us in poetic and creative ways to envision and create a future that is socially just, culturally rich and ecologically restorative. I believe this aligns well with the Griffin's narrative and offers a very appropriate and tangible way of updating their story for the 21st century. Some of the interesting aspects of this framework and that requires us, we need to take different approaches and ask different questions in our designs. Where is it acceptable for people to build? Perhaps the human race has taken enough land for its living and working purposes, and we should leave what is left for general habitat, other species and food production. We should ensure that new development restores and improves land that we've already used and damaged. Additionally, we should incorporate as many food growing opportunities as possible in all developments. How can we create communities that are based on humans rather than cars? How do we design humane places where walking and bicycles are the primary modes of transport, supported by efficient public transport? How do we create buildings that are part of a system where all the energy and water they need is harvested on or near site? How do we create developments that are a positive part of the local ecosystem? How can they improve the water and natural nutrient systems, not take from them? What does a robust and healthy building that addresses physical, psychological well-being look and operate like? Operable windows and biophilia are wonderful ideas that help with this regard. How do we find and design with materials that are not toxic, understanding of their carbon footprint, sustainably harvested, engage in equitable employment practices, are sourced locally, and value their inherent nature and embodied energy? How do we ensure that our designs support a just and equitable world for everyone? And really importantly, how do we do all of this so our buildings are beautiful and enriching, encouraging us to really care for them? I think it leads to some fundamental shifts in design. For example, how big our buildings could be determined by how much energy and water can be harvested and or treated on site, and the local density required to deliver services in a walking, cycling community with viable public transport as backup. The construction we choose should be based primarily on what sustainable materials and skills can be found locally. We should celebrate the localness of place and invest in the people and economies our projects are located in at the same time. I'm actively pursuing this framework and how it can be supported and implemented in Australia, and how it can be put into practice in my work with my clients. And I look forward to reporting more on that in the future. So to conclude, it's 100 years since Australia was lucky enough to enjoy the creative genius of Marion Mahony and Walter Burley Griffin and their powerful narrative for what a great country we could be. Their story still has great relevance and should be very much part of the ongoing development of Australia. I believe this will allow the magic of Australia to continue to be revealed as we actively seek to make our country the democratic, visionary and egalitarian place the Griffins anticipated. Thank you. So I'm happy to take questions, I think.
I'm here to help.
Great.
Thanks, Caroline. That was really wonderful. We've got some time for questions, and as well as taking questions from the audience, we might be taking questions from the internet as well. So we'll start with the audience. And there's some roving mics going around. Rosemary?
The other day, I was in a meeting and I was told that architects are not a cultural group. So I thought about this. I was shocked at first and I said, my God, you know, how far have we strayed? But I talked with some friends who knew a little bit about the background to this, and apparently the Institute of Architects in Queensland challenged a decision at court on Ascot Chambers, and the judge came up with a definition from the Macquarie Dictionary on cultural groups and decided that architects were not. So I just wonder what you think about that.
Well, I don't agree at all with that. I think that that the people we are, the work we do, the interests we have are all very culturally led and culturally related, and I think any architecture that has relevance has got to be related to the culture within it, which it falls and responds to, and in creating that culture, you know, as Winston Churchill said, we shape our buildings and they then shape us. And I think that that is really important in shaping a whole lot of stuff, particularly the culture of a place. So I'm not sure where that judge is living, but it's not on the same planet as I am.
Thank you, Caroline, for a wonderful talk. You mentioned early on that the Griffins had a connection with the first Australians. Could you elaborate a little on that aspect for me, please?
It was more my drawing of, I don't know how much they were connected with the first Australians, but I just think that their understanding of the importance of the landscape and respect for it, and the fact that their work brought out the best of it and worked with it, is to me runs in parallel with how the first Australians approached the land. It's not one of domination and destruction, it's one of cohabitation and collaboration. And I think that I meant more to say that I think it's a very aligned way of thinking. And I also think their notion of there being a seamless, I suppose it's back to this question, there was no disjuncture between their architecture and their art and their theatre and their joy of living. And same with our first Australians, their whole lives were one and the same, and there was a seamless integration. And I think that reflects a much more holistic way of being in the world. And I think that there is alignment there with our first Australians.
Thank you for that presentation. You mentioned the national broadband network along the way. Some of the communications technologies that shaped the Griffin's plan for Canberra were the railway and the tram network. How do you envisage the broadband network shaping our physical environment in the future?
I hope that the broadband network will enable a whole, this great dream of regionalisation in Australia that has never been possible. I'm hoping that it will enable, and it is already enabling people to have incredibly busy businesses, not in Sydney, not in Canberra, but in smaller towns, and enjoy the wonderful lifestyle that can be afforded in a quieter place. Plus also make most of there's so many country towns around Australia that have got wonderful buildings, great infrastructure, and totally underutilised. And I think that that something like the NBN will enable a change back to that, going from all wanting to live in a couple of major cities to being able to live more broadly, and I think it will be transformative.
Is this working? We've got a web question now, and it is, I feel like I'm adjudicating. You showed Marion's beautiful tree portraits. How would Marion react to the present issues around logging?
It's a really interesting question, and I think we've got to have a debate in Australia about logging that is much more nuanced than the current one, because as an architect, I find that the hardwood timber that we grow in this country to be fantastic building material, and that we should be able to grow trees to be able to use them. And I think that but at the same time, there are certain parts of old growth forests that we should not touch and that should be left pristine. But I think the idea of growing trees to use them is a really important idea that we need to work out how to do that so that it is sustainably done, and that the environments within which they're grown are protected, and that the whole logging process is done as respectfully as possible. But I think it is a truly renewable and wonderful resource that we in Australia don't do enough with. When we were in North America just earlier this year and in Europe, they have got fantastic timber industries where they really utilise and right down to the very, even to the waste. They use the timber well, create amazing products that can be used in really low carbon buildings. And we're not doing that at the moment. And I think we have such an opportunity to do that, but we've got to do it well. And I think Marion, who advocated for use of local materials, would see that. But again, it's not a right or wrong, black and white answer. It's a nuanced thing and I don't think we've had that proper debate here.
Any more questions?
Could you give us your personal views on the ways in which Canberra's planning and development have evolved, particularly over the last 20 years?
Well, I know whatever I say will be controversial, but I think Canberra could be a lot denser. I think, and not suffer from that, but actually be really quite enriched by it. And I think that the density, the lack of public transport here is a real problem, I think. And the fact that you can't even get here by train from Sydney in a reasonable amount of time is ridiculous. And you need density, you need numbers to make that sort of thing work. And I don't think that density means a treeless environment in fact, I think density and planting can go hand in hand, but I think perhaps there needs to be some management of the car domination and the fact that sort of an unfettered right to go as fast as you can between A and B perhaps isn't an inalienable right, and that perhaps other modes of transport, particularly pedestrians and bikes and public transport, need to be given some preference. I think the Griffin legacy probably covers a bit of that, but I understand there's some controversy, but I think it's a very good plan.